An uneasy gathering. The GCC has met in Saudi Arabia, but the blockade of Qatar, the war in Yemen, and a journalist's murder overshadowed the summit. Can this powerful six-nation bloc survive? What does the future hold? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. Leaders and officials from 6 Gulf nations have met in the Saudi capital, Riyadh, to discuss cooperation from the economy to security. But it's regional disunity that's hanging over the summit. In his opening address, Saudi Arabia's King Salman didn't mention the blockade of Qatar by his country and 2 other GCC member states. But it's that dispute, the war in Yemen, and the diplomatic crisis surrounding the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi that are overshadowing the event. There was a plea, however, from leaders to work together.
The Gulf Cooperation Council states is working for the prosperity and solidarity and cohesion of the GCC countries. Through these countries, all the ambitions will be achieved, and we need all to work hard in order to keep and maintain this great solidarity, cohesion and synergy.
We have faced a lot of challenges, and on top of them there are the differences between our GCC nations. We need not to risk the interests of our peoples, the peoples of the GCC Council states. The GCC must not be hesitant. We need to keep our situation firm, our stand firm, and we need to be able to face the challenges in our region.
Well, there was one notable absentee at the meeting, the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. Al Jazeera's Jamal Al explains why.
Qatar choosing to send a low-ranking official there, and obviously there are several reasons behind it. From a macro perspective, let's say, you're talking about the crisis still ongoing, that is the blockade imposed by Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain now for almost 2 years. And specifically speaking, however, if this summit was to take place, let's say in Oman, or as it did last year in Kuwait, it's very much likely that Qatar would have sent the head of state, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. However, the fact that this is taking place in Riyadh, and there's been a lot of, let's say, unconventional policies, to put it in a diplomatic term, pursued by the Saudi leadership in terms of the reports of them detaining, kidnapping essentially a head of state previously, Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri of Lebanon, in the sense that there have been reports that the Saudis, together with their allies, in fact, tried to orchestrate some sort of coup inside Doha. It isn't very surprising that the Qatari leadership did not feel too confident in sending its head of state there.
Let's hear now from Al Jazeera's Osama bin Javid, who's on Qatar's border with Saudi Arabia.
If this was May 2017, we would have been standing in the middle of a very busy traffic lane where people would have been moving from Qatar towards Saudi Arabia. This is the only land border that this country has, which has been blockaded by Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, 3 of the 6 members of the Gulf Cooperation Council who are meeting in Riyadh. They have been discussing various ways of cooperation and try to keep this union alive, a very rare success story between these members of the Middle East that has been ongoing since 1981, but has been facing a lot of difficulties since the blockade of Qatar began. It is also happening on the backdrop where journalist Jamal Khashoggi was murdered by agents of the Saudi government, where Saudi Arabia is also facing internal and external pressure, and at the backdrop of Qatar leaving the oil-producing club OPEC as well. Qatar insisting that its decision was based on it wanting to export more gas than any politics. But the future of the GCC still continues to hang in the balance, where the blockading nations saying that they are confident that this crisis is not going to change the future of this 6-member cooperation council, but everyone else looking at it from the outside thinks that this is going to be very difficult for them to be able to keep this face on, while 3 of their members are blockading one nation. Osama bin Javed, Al Jazeera, at the Busamra border for Inside Story.
Well, the Gulf Cooperation Council is a political and economic alliance made up of 6 countries: Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Oman, Qatar and Bahrain. Established in 1981, its aim was to provide regional and national security. At that time, the Islamic Revolution in Iran was taking place, also the Iran-Iraq War. The GCC countries are among the wealthiest in the world, their primary exports being oil and gas. But in June last year, there was a big fallout. Saudi Arabia led a blockade, which also included the UAE and Bahrain, against Qatar. In December, the summit in Kuwait was cut short after the 3 blockading countries sent lower-level delegations instead of heads of state. And this year's gathering comes amid a diplomatic crisis following the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, with many people saying that the Saudi crown prince is to blame. Mohammed bin Salman has also been criticised for his role in the war in Yemen, where thousands of civilians have been killed. Well, let's bring in our guests for today's discussion. Joining me here in Doha is Marwan Kabalan, Head of Policy Analysis at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. From Kuwait City, we're joined by Abdullah Al-Shayji, Professor of Political Science at Kuwait University. And from Tehran, Mostafa Khoshcheshm, journalist and political commentator. Gentlemen, welcome to you all. Marwan Kabalan, we'll start with you. Given the dysfunctional relationships and tension between its members, does the GCC have any relevance today? Was Sunday's meeting a waste of time?
Well, I think many people are questioning now the very future of the GCC. Indeed, I mean, this is not the first crisis that the GCC is facing. We have seen many other crises before. Most important, perhaps, was the 1986 clash between Qatar and Bahrain over border dispute. But perhaps this is the most serious crisis since the establishment of the GCC in 1981. I think the countries, the member countries, are actually now having very different interests and are having very different threat perception. In 1981, it was established, as you said, as a security, as a collective security umbrella to defend the security of the member countries against Iran. As we all know, Iran, the Iranian Revolution in 1979, at that time expressed its intention to export the revolution to neighboring countries. So that was the key reason why the GCC was established. But today, actually, we see that some members are facing a threat from other members within the same bloc. So now I doubt that we have many blocks within this one bloc. We can actually delineate at least 3 different groups within the GCC now. Qatar and Oman on one hand, we have Saudi Arabia, Emirates and Bahrain on the other hand, and we have Kuwait trying to mediate between the 2. So I think the summit today in Riyadh is merely, it seems to many people actually as only ceremonial summit. Because nobody actually want to pronounce the GCC dead. Everybody wanted to be alive, but without, as you said, having a very important role to play for the time being.
Professor Al-Shayji in Kuwait, who's responsible for the current state of the GCC? Is it Qatar, Oman and Kuwait on one side, or the Crown Princes of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and their policies?
Well, it's the clash of projects. The essence of any alliance is to have a unanimous view and to hash out their troubles and their differences from within the organization itself, and not to let it fester and undermine the whole establishment, the whole organization. Now, all parties are suffering. There is a zero-sum game. There is an irrationality in tackling the disputes. I just published a book on the GCC crisis, and I argue that the main reason behind such crises is that we lack the lack of a unified vision and the lack of who is the adversary. And this is the most serious dispute that has erupted over the last 37 years of the existence of this was one of the most formidable and the most successful regional Arab integration organization. Now the illness has befallen this organization like all other Arab illness and symptoms. And because of that, there is an urgent need to help this organization from within, because this is a very damaging dispute that is undermining the very existence and the future.
But Mostafa Khoshcheshm, what's the Iranian view of the current state of the GCC? It was, after all, a regional grouping that was designed to counter Iranian policies.
Well, you know, PGCC is one of those products of the United States Iranophobia policy that started after the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and through a misuse of some slogans and mottos and causes of the Islamic Revolution that was stated by Iranian officials. That's why some Arab states, especially Saudi Arabia and its allies in the Arab world, supported Saddam Hussein against Iran in that war. The same climate was spreading in the region all throughout the last several decades, thanks to the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia that have been trying to use regional capacities and potentials against Iran to harness Iran, to actually stop Iran's growth and strike at Iran's economy and political dominance and influence in the region. But PGCC is now, a failure, actually, because that Iranophobia has now changed into a Saudiphobia because of the inexperienced policies exercised by the House of Saud in the last couple of years, from the Hariri case to Khashoggi to the blockade of Qatar, to the war on Yemen, and to the massacre of the civilian population in eastern Saudi Arabia. The world can very readily see that Saudi Arabia is exercising hawkish and provocative policies that could end up in wars in the region. So the Saudi leaders are discrediting themselves, they are weakening, and all affiliated groupings and bodies in the region that are led by the Saudis, or the Saudis have a major say in them, they are also weakening accordingly. And the PGCC is no exception to this fact. And that's only one of the reasons. The other one is the rift, as my colleagues stated, between the two groups of fronts within the PGCC. The rifts between Qatar, Oman, and Kuwait on one side, and the UAE, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia. The rifts between these two groups have never been wider than present, and PGCC is now believed to be a failure that would somehow be replaced by new groupings in future, as could be seen readily.
Okay, Marwan, Kabalan, the last Gulf crisis in 2014 came to an end because GCC states felt that they needed to show unity in the face of an existential threat from Islamic State, which at that time had taken over huge swathes of territory in their own backyard. The US, of course, wants to see a unified GCC now to act as a counterweight to Iran in the region. But the current Gulf crisis, as we've reported, shows little sign of being resolved. Is that because, basically some GCC countries don't perceive Iran to be a threat in the way that the US and Saudi Arabia do?
You're absolutely right. I think the Saudis, they have been pursuing a very damaging foreign policy, in my opinion, especially over the past 2 years since the ascendance of Prince Mohammed bin Salman, since he became crown prince in 2017. And I think the Saudis, this foreign policy actually is, in my opinion, backfiring, because at the time when they are actually saying that they want to counteract Iranian policies in the region, in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, everywhere, they are, in fact, as I said, pursuing a very damaging foreign policy, because their policy has led, in fact, to dividing the GCC. It also actually led to increasing Iranian influence somehow in the region by actually forcing Qatar to get closer to Iran. And Qatar, in fact, has withdrawn its ambassador from Tehran in early 2016 during the crisis over the storming of the Saudi embassy in Tehran and the Saudi consulate in Mashhad. So the Saudis maybe need to rethink their foreign policy if they want really to counteract Iran. But I don't agree with the statement that in 2014 it was the need to show unity. I think it was ended in 2014 because there was no much support and sympathy by the Obama administration with the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Bahrainis. The Obama administration was not, in fact, at that time willing to go as far as this administration in supporting the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Bahrainis in the blockade against Qatar. That is the key factor, in my opinion, which has led to the 2014, the end of the crisis in 2014. In my opinion, that was a truce more than ending the crisis because it was renewed again in 2017.
Professor Al-Shayji, the GCC long ago abandoned its role of building closer ties between member states. I mean, why continue with it? Saudi Arabia and the UAE already have an economic and military partnership. Why don't Qatar, Oman, and Kuwait form their own regional grouping, which perhaps brings in Iran and Turkey too?
Thank you. If you allow me just a rebuttal to our guest from Iran, I hope he will quit using the PGCC. It's not PGCC. It's called the Arab Gulf States. The Arab here is for the states, their heritage, their race, and not for the Persian. So there is really a phobia with the Iranians. They keep saying us PGCC. So please quit using that term. We're not disputing now, we're not going to argue with the semantic about the Persian or Arabian Gulf. I'm talking about the Arab Gulf states. The Arab here is for the states and not for the Gulf. Then regarding the phobia, it's not only Iran, it was also Saddam Hussein. Regarding the GCC, I think there is a need for this organization to keep going on. Yes, it's limping. Yes, it's lingering, but at the end of the day, GCC is used to be or has been the most successful Arab integration organization. There is a need for it to stay. Even the meeting today, the summit that is held right now in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, all Gulf leaders have argued very convincingly that we need this GCC organization to keep going, and just holding the annual summit on an annual basis, on a regular basis, uninterrupted, since 1981 is a testament to the resilience of this organization. Yes, any alliance will have troubles, any alliance will have disputes, but it's not unsurmountable. It could be solved, but there has to be a political will among the GCC leaders, because there is a much needed, urgent need for this organization to continue to face all the challenges and the troubles that is emanating from Iran, from a fractured Iraq, from the terrorist organization. And there is a need also, the West also would love to see a united GCC. President Trump talks about MESA, the Middle East Strategic Alliance. How could you have that alliance when you have a major dispute like the GCC crisis unresolved? You cannot talk about the luxury of forming a formidable military alliance to stand up to all the challenges facing our region, and you don't even discuss or you try to solve this dispute that has been going on for too long in a zero-sum game that's really weakening all parties involved and strengthening our adversaries. So I hope cooler head and rational heads would prevail, and we will have to sort out this crisis that we have withstood so many crises before, including the Iran-Iraq war, including the 9/11 attacks, including the disputes among the GCC themselves. But this is the most critical, and because of that, there is an urgent need to resolve it before it's too long.
Mostafa Khoshcheshm, I don't want to get bogged down in this discussion about what to call this grouping. What impact has the GCC had on Iran in terms of politics, the economy, security? Has it been held in check regionally by the GCC?
Not at all. Actually, Iran has always reiterated that it always wants the best relations with the regional states, including the Arab states on the southern rims of the Persian Gulf. And, this has been the Saudis that have been, starting this provocative policy against Iran and its allies. So the Saudis have been marginalized right now in political equations in Syria and in Iraq. Now, let's get back to the OPEC, where Qatar has been also bothered and annoyed by the Saudi policies, and it's threatened to leave OPEC to weaken the organization. If it loses its members, it would be weakened more than before. And it's all because of the Saudis oversupplying the market. They tried to sabotage the market and to bring down the prices through their oversupply. But because they are totally dependent on oil revenues, they sustained the harms more than anyone else. So the Saudis' inexperienced hawkish policies and against Iran to prove that they could lead a front against Iran, they have caused much harm, not just to others, but also to themselves. They might go bankrupt after a rich country like Saudi Arabia had somewhere around $100 billion of budget deficit last year. Yeah. The Saudis are paying, and the Saudi people are paying for these naive policies. And Qatar has very smartly, I believe, distanced itself from Saudi Arabia in the war in Yemen. They changed sides after a while, very smartly. Now we can see that Saudi Arabia cannot even win not just the whole war, but also a single battle in order to win the upper hand in the negotiations. They have failed in Hodeidah port city battle, and they cannot get out of this quagmire. Qatar distanced itself after the rift, and the Saudis intended to punish them, but they failed. And this hawkish policy of Saudi Arabia towards Doha has pushed Doha towards Tehran more than ever. Oman has not changed sides. It has remained so. It is in good terms with Iran and with the opposite sides both, but it has not distanced itself from Tehran. So as you see, the rifts are widening, and there are clear, I know you're short of time, but let me get through with this one sentence, that there are clear indications that Qatar, Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and Oman are starting or are willing to start a new grouping to replace the PGCC or whatever you call it.
Marwan, Kabalan, some pretty controversial statements in that answer. Do you want to counter those?
I think it's really important to state it differently. Iran is not innocent, as your guest from Tehran is trying to portray it. Iran is also sending money and weapons to militant groups in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. Iran is interfering in the internal affairs of most of the countries in the region. The GCC was established in the first place because of the perception of Iranian threat, and we must look at these small Gulf countries on the eastern shores of the Arabian Peninsula, and you can actually compare between Iran as a big hegemon regional power in the region and these small countries. And Iran is not actually giving any assurances to these countries in order to try to diffuse the tension that is already there. And so I'm just trying actually to make this balance between what the Saudis are doing and what the Iranians are doing. And in fact, most of us here in the region are stuck in between, are caught in this crossfire between the Iranians and the Saudis because of this conflict between the Iranians and Saudi. And I can see actually the attitude of the Saudis and the Iranians not very much from each other. And as I said, it's wreaking havoc across the region, and we need maybe to see an end to this conflict. So it's not one side threat or something like we need to. Yeah.
We're out of time, I'm afraid. Marwan, Kabalan, Professor Abdullah Shayji and Mostafa Khoshcheshm, many thanks indeed for being with us on today's Inside Story. As always, thank you for watching. Don't forget you can see the programme at any time just by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the whole team here. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again. Bye for now.